Hey there guys, it's your friendly neighborhood flick pick, and here's my spoiler review of Spider-Man No Way Home. Okay, I can take this off now. Spider-Man No Way Home. I haven't felt spider tingles like this with an MCU film since Cap picked up Thor's hammer. Does anyone else feel the same way? And I'm really happy to say finally in this current trilogy of Spider-Man films, Iron Boy has become Spider-Man. And real quick, the reason I didn't do a normal review for this movie was there was just too much to tiptoe around with this movie, and plus I did a first reaction on this channel, and then on my second channel, John Flickinger, I did a flick trip talking about my experience before and after the movie, where essentially I did a review of the movie, so I figured let's just dive into the good stuff. And since it's almost Christmas time and I want to give you guys free stuff, I'm hosting this really cool event for an upcoming movie directed by Michael Bay called Ambulance starring Jake Gyllenhaal. It's an exclusive free-to-join online event on the Popcorn platform where I'm going to show you guys some behind-the-scenes footage not released anywhere for the upcoming Michael Bay movie, where you guys get to give your feedback, tell them what you think about it. Essentially, you guys get to be test audience members and also win some free Amazon gift cards along the way. So link to that down below. I'll talk more about it at the end of this video. Spider-Man No Way Home. Who would have ever thought a movie like this would become a reality? It's almost like really good fan fiction you would read on a Reddit forum at 2 o'clock in the morning, and trust me, I've been there. But now it exists. I saw the movie 2 times and it still blows my mind. It doesn't feel like reality, and in a weird way, this is a movie almost 20 years in the making if you go back to the original Spider-Man movie from 2002. When it comes to the Tom Holland Spider-Man flicks, I really enjoyed Homecoming for the most part. I liked the first act the most because it felt like that friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Hey Spider-Man, do a backflip! I like things like that. And then when it came to Spider-Man Far From Home, it just felt sort of like a stepping stone movie. The only thing that really gave that movie any purpose was the last 2 minutes of the movie, where Mysterio revealed Spider-Man's secret identity as Peter Parker, which sets up the plot of this movie. And the basic synopsis of Spider-Man No Way Home is Dr. Strange cast a spell, making everyone forget the secret identity of who Spider-Man really is, including his friends and his family. And that's where I have one of my minute issues with this film. I just don't buy into Dr. Strange's character being that irresponsible to cast a spell without understanding the future dangers and repercussions of such a thing. It's like the real Doctor Strange would probably never do that because it goes against all character logic, but for the sake of the story and making this movie work, it had to happen, so I just kind of accept it. Now let's really dive into this. I don't know what that was. Let's dive into the sticky stuff, and here's the main reason I didn't want to do a normal non-spoiler review of this movie, because it would be almost a detriment to my own humanity not to be able to talk about Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield returning as Spider-Man in this movie. And that still blows my mind. The fact I just said that, and that's a reality. In a weird way, it almost feels like the animated Into the Spider-Verse movie was like a warm-up for this live-action movie. One of my favorite scenes in this film that gave me chills was when all 3 Spider-Men were on the Statue of Liberty and they run and jump off and the camera's tracking behind them. It just literally made my body just goosebumps, chills went down my spine, and both my nips got hard. Yeah, I'm just keeping it real with you. That's what happened. Now, did any of you notice this when you watched the movie in theaters? When they first introduced Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, he almost got a bigger reaction from the audience than when Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man stepped through the portal. Maybe it's just because Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man was the first one to come through, so he got the bigger reaction. Or maybe he was wearing the actual Spider-Man suit and Tobey Maguire just showed up looking like a youth pastor, as they would say in the movie. When it comes to Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, I like Andrew Garfield as a dude. He just seems like a down-to-earth guy you could talk to, and he just seems like he's having a lot of fun whenever he plays the character, and I appreciate things like that. But when it comes to the Amazing Spider-Man movies, I thought the first one was mediocre at best, and then you had the second movie, The Amazing Spider-Man 2, which still to this day is one of the most... it was a letdown to say the least. But with all that said, when it comes to Andrew Garfield returning as Spider-Man once again in this movie, I almost appreciated him more this time around because he felt like he had the most humanity in comparison with Tom Holland's Spider-Man or Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man. He sort of felt like a fan that became a Spider-Man, and he wasn't playing it as cool as Tom Holland or Tobey Maguire in this movie. He was like more excited, and you could just feel that excitement through his character in this movie because he's like, wow, you can do this, you fought an alien, you can shoot web, how does that work? I got this real sense of emotion and excitement from his character, and I bought into it. And also, one of my favorite lines he gives is, yeah, I'm lame, I fought some Russian dude in a robotic rhinoceros suit. Then to top it off, you have Tobey Maguire saying, no, you're amazing, you're amazing. which is a reference to the Amazing Spider-Man. And it's just little things like that, a little banter back and forth throughout this movie that just makes it so special. It feels like it was written by Spider-Man fans for Spider-Man fans, and I just love all those little nods and references that never feel heavy-handed, but they're so well balanced, and I just appreciate things like that so much. And his Spider-Man had one of the most crowd-pleasing moments throughout this entire movie when he saves the day by redeeming himself and saving MJ. It's my back! And that scene was the greatest nod of all time because it's like complete fan service but done so well, and I've always said this, I'm a fan, so service me. And that's what this movie does. I like how it referenced previous Spider-Man movies where Tobey Maguire's character falls on a car and he says, "Oh, my back," which actually was something from real life where he actually was having back issues on the set of Spider-Man, so they put it into the movie and now they're referencing it 20 years later. So I liked it. And when it comes to Tobey Maguire, the original Spider-Man himself, I never, ever thought I would see him return wearing the Spider-Man spandex suit again, but we got it. I'm telling you guys right now, we live in an alternate universe. Like, I feel like there's a real-life Doctor Strange. He cast a spell, and something happened over the last 2 years because it's like everything's upside down and makes no sense. And when it comes to Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, did anyone else assume at the very end where the Green Goblin stabs him, he was going to die? I was like, please don't kill off the original Spider-Man. My childhood would be ruined. And thankfully, it just wraps up with, yeah, I've been stabbed before. I was like, okay, that would just be too dark, even in this movie. One of my favorite aspects about all three Spider-Men sharing the same screen together for the first time in a live-action movie ever was, when they first meet up, they're not comparing each other's manhoods, who can shoot the bigger web, who's the best Spider-Man. They didn't do any of that shit. In the first scene they all share together, they're consoling Tom Holland's Spider-Man after the loss of Aunt May. And it was like a touching moment where they're talking about their past losses and what made them better Spider-Men, because with great power comes great responsibility. And, you know, when Aunt May said it, I guess it didn't have the same impact as when Uncle Ben said it back in 2002 when he died on the cold streets after Spider-Man fought Bonesaw. But either way, it was a very touching moment. And when it comes to Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, the one thing he kind of skims over is he does say, yes, I lost someone. She was sort of like my MJ. But the one thing he also neglects to say is he also lost his Uncle Ben. In a weird way, he had the most loss out of any of these characters. And I really do feel like they utilize Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man and Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man coming back to have a purpose where you get some sense of fulfillment. But once again, it's so entertaining that time just instantly flies by once they show up on screen. That's my only complaint, and that's really not even a complaint. It's just what happens. Now, since we just talked about the Spider-Men, I think it's time to talk about the villains of this film. And had they just tacked in one more, they could have essentially had the Sinister Six. But I think Sony's trying to savor that flavor from an upcoming new Spider-Man reboot trilogy where they utilize solo movies of villains and then they build it up to the Sinister Six to have another payoff in like 3 or 4 years. I'm sure that's what they're doing. So they didn't want to use the name of Sinister Six just yet because they didn't want to blow their webs this early. But yeah, just one more. You would have had the Sinister Six. Just one more. I love me some Willem Dafoe, and as Green Goblin, he is perfect. He, in a weird way, always has this ability to unintentionally make me laugh, and I mean that in the best way possible. Itsy bitsy spider! I love that voice. One of my favorite things about Willem Dafoe was he only agreed to return to this movie if he could do his own stunts because he enjoys it so much, and I respect things like that. And I was happy to see throughout this film he does have a reason for being there. He does have some screen time where he has that demented, twisted, split personality, and I felt like he had purpose for existing in this movie rather than just popping up at the very end, so I liked that. But when it comes to villains in this film, I felt like Doc Ock, played by Alfred Molina, had the biggest character arc of any villain and pretty much the most screen time, or at least the most humanity and most conversation with the majority of characters. He was sort of like, in a weird way, the voice of all of the villains in this movie. And I wasn't expecting that, and I liked by the end of the movie, he sort of becomes a good guy again. He returns to his normal self and sort of redeems himself by saving the day ever so slightly, and that was a nice character arc in this movie. Like, he had a purpose for existing, and they did something with his character. Now let's talk about 3 other villains who sort of felt obligatory in this movie, but nevertheless, I enjoyed seeing them. But the first one I want to talk about is the Lizard. Now, when it comes to the Lizard, he had one of the worst plans of any of the villains. He wanted to turn an entire city into lizards. It's pretty stupid. But I did like how everyone called him a dinosaur in this movie. That was great. But essentially, by the end of this movie, he's just playing tag with MJ and Ned on the Statue of Liberty. So, yeah, he was sort of just there as an obligatory villain. And just on a quick side note, one nitpick I would have with the lizard in this movie was his CG in the first Amazing Spider-Man actually looked better to me than it does in this movie, which came out 10 years after the Amazing Spider-Man 1 did. So, yeah, that's one nitpick. And speaking of CG villains, you also had Sandman returning once again. And it really felt like Sandman in this movie had no purpose for being there whatsoever. Like, he just wanted to go back home and hang out with his daughter. He was almost annoyed that he had to be there. So it just felt a little bit obligatory, to say the least. And also, one interesting thing about this movie was Thomas Hayden Church, who played the original Sandman back in 2007, couldn't actually return to do this movie, so I guess he did some voice work. And at the very end of this movie, they actually recycle a scene that they used in the 2007 Spider-Man 3 movie in this scene. They just copy and pasted the same sequence of him turning into his human form, reaching up. And with all of that, now let's talk about Jamie Foxx returning once again as Electro. Now, I love me some Jamie Foxx, but man, oh man, the villain of Electro back in Amazing Spider-Man 2, that was a big blue pile of shit. But I was happy to see that he's no longer blue and he sort of looks normal, and they sort of redeemed the look of Electro in this movie. And they do acknowledge the different look, though they don't actually explain it. And also, it's been a long time since I've seen The Amazing Spider-Man 2, but does Electro ever find out who Spider-Man's secret identity is? So how did he show up in this universe? Now, I'm sort of doing this review in reverse. I'm going to give you my thoughts on the first half of this movie and some of the complaints I had with it. But first, I'm going to wrap up my thoughts on the third act of this film. And I will just say the hype was real, it delivered, and it had all those different elements that make a big spectacle blockbuster comic book movie so great. And the best thing I can say about this movie was it reminded me of being a kid and going to the movie theaters back in the 1990s and just watching these big, awesome movies that have all these fun character moments and charisma, and it's just a spectacle that puts a smile on your face. And that's what it needs to be, and that's what it was. Now let's talk about the first half of this movie, and it's by no means a bad first half. There was so much ground to cover and so much story to establish so we could get to the payoff by the end of this movie. But I will say this, the first half of this movie felt like a different movie, and the second half felt like tonally another movie. It almost felt like two directors handled this movie. The first half felt like a very formulaic Marvel movie. Now, this is just speculation from my brain to you guys, but I have a theory that Marvel said, okay, in the first half of this movie, you have to set up all these different things so we can do what we need to do in future installments, but with the second half of the movie, Sony, you can do whatever you need to do. And it feels like that was almost the agreement, because tonally, that's what it feels like's happening in this movie. All right, now let's talk about the bittersweet ending of this movie. And it was an ending that I was not expecting, but it's an ending that I felt was very needed. It gave it that emotional impact, that punch that this movie needed. And it reminded me of another comic book movie called The Dark Knight, where it sort of has a bittersweet ending. And with this, there's a few scenes I really love that give me those feels. And I sound like a fanboy, but it's true. This movie delivered on the emotion, and I didn't expect it to do this, so it was a pleasant surprise. At the very end, MJ's like, okay, I understand this is the plan, but once this happens, you come find me and you make me remember. And Peter's like, I will. And then in the next scene, it looks like some time has passed, and Peter Parker goes into this diner to confront MJ to make her remember who he is, and Ned's over there eating a donut. And then as he's looking at her, he notices a bandage over her eye where she was wounded from some of these events that happened in the past. And he's instantly reminded that maybe the best thing for her and Ned is to stay out of their lives. That way they're out of danger. And he makes the ultimate sacrifice, which is like the gut punch emotional moment of the movie, where he just says, no, that'll be all, and leaves. And for me, that's the moment in this movie where he stopped being Iron Boy and became Spider-Man. And that's what I wanted to see. That was the character arc he needed to make going forward. And that makes me super excited to see future installments with Tom Holland. But it's the scene after that that gives me those feels and the most excitement moving forward with Tom Holland as Spider-Man. You see him moving on with his life. He's living in a shitty apartment. And then in the next scene, you see a very homemade, spandexy, bright version of the Spider-Man suit. And then it cuts to him swinging across the snowy skyline of New York. Oh, yes, please. And that's one of the most brilliant things they could have done with this film, because it essentially, by the end, is a soft reboot releasing Tom Holland's Spider-Man from the MCU back to Sony to where they can do whatever they want with him as a solo Spider-Man, not relying on the other events of the MCU and the Avengers and Tony Stark, because this story released him from all of those aspects to where he can be free and do whatever they need to do in future installments. Now, I know I just praised this movie for the last however long this video is, but I do have a few nitpicks, especially with some of the CG effects. Now, this is a very CG effects heavy movie, and I understand that, and a lot of it looks great, but there's a few times in this movie where it just looks overly artificial for the sake of being artificial. For example, there's a few sequences on the bridge fight where he's fighting Doc Ock, where it just feels like everyone's standing in front of a green screen with artificial hair lights. It just doesn't look realistic at all. And it's like, how hard would it have been just to find a bridge and shoot some of these scenes on that bridge? It's just little tweaks and changes like that that would make this movie a little bit more immersive and not feel so glossy. So with all that said, here's my rating for Spider-Man No Way Home. Listen, it's not written like The Shawshank Redemption, but it wasn't meant to be. And watching this movie, after it's over, you kind of ask yourself, well, what more could they have done to appease me as a fan? I feel like they gave us everything they needed to do, wrapped up all of the loose ends, gave characters arcs that were deserved and earned, and it also, most importantly, set up the character of Spider-Man going forward to be the best representation of the character that's going to be taken probably the most serious. So with all that said, I just feel like this movie delivered. And once again, it made me feel like a little kid watching movies in the movie theater again. And for that, well, I just say good job, Spider-Man No Way Home. Don't go anywhere, because I want you guys to join this event that I'm hosting on the Popcorn platform, where I'm talking about some exclusive footage from the upcoming Michael Bay movie Ambulance, where you guys get a sneak peek and some behind the scenes footage. But most importantly, and the coolest thing is, you guys get to become test audience members, where you get this sneak peek at this exclusive footage and you get to give your feedback, your thoughts, what you think about it, what you didn't like. The link to that event is down below. It's open to the first 2,000 people who join it. And like I said, you get a sneak peek at some exclusive footage from the upcoming Michael Bay movie. And the other great thing is, there's some trivia questions it's going to ask you where you can win Amazon gift cards. So yeah, free stuff, get a sneak peek at a movie, definitely check it out down below. It's a good time. And before I go, I have a question for you, and let me know down below in the comments section, what did you think about Spider-Man No Way Home, and what was your favorite scene in this film that just gave you those feels? As always, guys, I'm your friendly neighborhood flick pick, and I'll see you guys next time.